swear you don't like what I do to you." The words did not come out loud. They came out low, measured, certain. The room did not move when he said it. The baby slept in the next room, breathing softly, unaware that the air between her parents had just changed forever. A faint glow from the hallway light slipped under the door, but inside the room, nothing felt warm. Nothing felt safe. Peggy stood still. She did not step back. She did not step closer. Her body knew better than to move before her mind caught up. She had heard many things in her life, promises, excuses, apologies, but this was different. This was not a plea. It was not curiosity. It was a challenge. Dilly watched her the way he watched markets when numbers refused to bend. Calm on the outside, tight on the inside. He was used to control, used to certainty, used to knowing that what he brought to the table was enough to settle any disagreement. Money had always ended conversations. Confidence had always closed gaps. Silence had always worked in his favor. But Peggy was not silent. She felt the weight of the moment press against her chest, not because she was afraid of him, but because she finally understood him. The tone of his voice carried more than desire. It carried pride, expectation, the quiet demand that she reassure him without him having to change anything at all. The baby shifted in her sleep. That small sound cut through the tension sharper than any raised voice could have. It reminded Peggy why she was still standing there, why she had stayed this long, why she had tried to explain herself gently, again and again, hoping he would hear what she was really saying. Dilly took a slow step closer, not touching, not reaching, just close enough to remind her of everything they had shared, the nights that blurred together, the attraction that never faded, the way desire had once made everything else feel small. "Swear it," he said again, quieter this time. The room felt smaller now. This was not about pleasure. This was not about intimacy. This was about power disguised as closeness. Peggy lifted her eyes to his. For the first time since she had given birth, since her world had rearranged itself around feedings and responsibility and sacrifice, she felt completely awake, not angry, not emotional, awake. She saw the man in front of her clearly, a man who had provided, a man who had shown up, a man who had never truly listened. The silence stretched, not because she didn't have an answer, but because she understood what that answer would cost her. Outside, the city slept on, unaware that a single sentence spoken in a quiet room was about to set everything in motion. Peggy did not always believe love could confuse you this way. She grew up watching women hold families together with patience and prayer, women who believed staying meant strength and leaving meant failure. In her world, love was endurance. Love was sacrifice. Love was choosing peace for your child, even when your own heart felt unsettled. So she stayed, not because she was weak, not because she was dependent, but because a baby changes how you measure risk. Have you ever stayed with someone because there was a child involved, even when your spirit felt unsettled? Have you ever told yourself that stability mattered more than happiness, that quiet discomfort was better than uncertainty? Peggy had asked herself those questions many nights, usually while rocking her daughter back to sleep, whispering promises she was not sure she could keep. Promises of wholeness, promises of love that would grow with time. Dilly had never raised his voice. He had never walked away. He had never failed to provide. And yet, something was missing. Have you ever loved someone who showed up physically but remained distant emotionally? Someone who heard your words but never truly absorbed them? Peggy had tried to explain. Carefully, kindly, she spoke about connection, about feeling understood, about wanting intimacy that felt mutual instead of assumed. Each time, Dilly listened just long enough to respond, not long enough to reflect. Have you ever confused desire for love? That question haunted her more than the others. Desire had been easy between them. Strong, persistent, familiar. It had carried them through attraction, through forgiveness, through moments when logic should have stopped them. But desire did not teach someone how to listen. Desire did not soften pride. Desire did not guarantee safety. And still, she wondered if she was asking for too much, if she was being unfair, if motherhood had made her expectations heavier, If love was supposed to feel this way and no one ever talked about it. Peggy knew many women who carried similar questions quietly, women who smiled in public and swallowed disappointment in private. Women who stayed because leaving felt selfish. Women who endured because they were told endurance was love. The truth was, she did not want to leave. She wanted to be understood. And that was why the question Dilly asked cut so deeply. It reduced everything she had tried to explain into something simple, something convenient, something that placed the burden back on her. The silence that followed his words was filled with every unasked question she had ever carried. Peggy had already told him no, not loudly, not dramatically, just clearly. When Dilly asked her to marry him weeks earlier, it wasn't unexpected. The timing made sense on paper. A child, a shared history, a future that looked stable from the outside. He spoke about security, about doing the right thing, about building something official. She listened without interrupting. Then she refused. Not because she didn't care, not because she didn't feel anything, but because she knew marriage would not fix what they were avoiding. Dilly was a wealthy investor, a man respected in rooms where decisions carried weight. He knew how to read numbers, how to anticipate outcomes, how to move resources until they aligned with his goals. Control had always rewarded him. But intimacy did not follow the same rules. Money had solved problems in his life before. It had quieted doubts, smoothed conflicts, and reassured people who needed proof more than presence. With Peggy, money removed obstacles, but it never closed the distance. That distance was what she tried to explain. She did not need more gifts. She did not need grand gestures. She did not need promises spoken with confidence but never examined. What she needed was effort where pride usually stood. Dilly heard rejection where there was honesty. He felt challenged where she was asking for understanding. The real conflict between them had nothing to do with finances. It was not about lifestyle or access or opportunity. It was about what happened when the doors were closed and expectations went unspoken. Peggy wanted closeness that felt mutual. Dilly relied on certainty that felt automatic. That difference had been easy to ignore before the baby arrived. Attraction covered it. Desire blurred it. Now, responsibility made it impossible to avoid. Dilly believed providing was proof of love. Peggy believed listening was. And in that quiet room, with their child sleeping nearby, those two beliefs collided. This was not a story about a man who failed to show up. It was a story about a man who showed up everywhere, except where it mattered most. The tension did not rise slowly. It snapped into place. Because when love is questioned and pride feels exposed, people reach for control. And Dilly reached for the one thing he thought could settle the matter: her desire. That was how the words came out of him the way they did. Not as curiosity, not as reflection, but as a test. Peggy understood something in that moment that she had been avoiding for months. Attraction can feel powerful. Desire can feel convincing, but neither answers the harder questions. She looked at Dilly and realized that wanting someone does not automatically mean knowing them. Wanting someone does not guarantee patience. Wanting someone does not teach a person how to soften their pride when love asks for change. Dilly believed desire settled the argument. That if she wanted him, then everything else should fall into place. That intimacy was proof enough. But Peggy had learned, painfully and quietly, that attraction can exist even when understanding is missing. That two people can feel pulled toward each other while still speaking different emotional languages. That was the question hanging between them now. Was love supposed to feel like this? Was attraction enough to build a life on? Was desire meant to excuse the moments when someone refused to listen? Was control simply confidence wearing a more charming face? She thought of her child sleeping nearby, a child who would one day learn what love looked like by watching them, a child who would absorb their silences as much as their words. Peggy knew she could stay. She knew she could accept the comfort of certainty. She knew she could allow attraction to quiet her doubts, but she also knew the cost. The question was no longer about what Dilly wanted. It was about what love demanded. Did attraction equal love? Or could it hide control? That question would decide everything that came next. Before this story goes any further, pause for just a moment. Stories like this don't travel far unless people interact with them. And there is someone listening right now who needs to hear this. Not later, not someday, but now. So please, take a second to like this video, leave a comment, even if it's just a word, and subscribe to Mr. Osteen's Story and Love Tales. Your support helps stories like this reach the hearts they're meant for. Because what unfolds next is not just about attraction. It's about truth. It's about love tested where pride usually stands. And it's about a choice that will change everything. Peggy learned early that love was not something you rushed into. In Atlanta, she was surrounded by women who believed that how a man treated your spirit mattered more than how he made you feel in a moment. Her childhood was shaped by Sunday mornings that started early and ended late, by church halls filled with laughter, food, and conversations that stretched long after service ended. Church was not just a place of worship. It was where women talked honestly. Aunties who spoke in low voices about marriage, about patience, about knowing when to stand firm and when to walk away. Older women who had stayed too long, and younger ones who were learning how not to disappear inside someone else's expectations. Peggy listened more than she spoke. She learned that attraction could be loud, but wisdom often arrived quietly. That love, real love, was steady, intentional, rooted in respect. She learned to watch patterns, not promises. To notice how a man handled disagreement, not just desire. Her social life reflected that grounding. Family gatherings where everyone knew her name. Friends who checked on her without needing a reason. Conversations that did not shy away from truth, even when truth was uncomfortable. She was taught that a woman did not lose her value by asking for more. She lost herself by accepting less. That understanding shaped how she moved through the world. When she worked, she carried herself with calm confidence. When she spoke, she chose her words carefully. She did not perform softness to be liked, nor hardness to be respected. She had watched too many women mistake tolerance for love and call it loyalty. By the time she became an adult, Peggy knew exactly who she was. She wanted love, yes, but she wanted peace more. That balance between desire and discernment was what made her different. It was what made people underestimate her, and it was what made her dangerous in rooms where men were used to being unquestioned. She did not know yet that this grounding, this quiet strength shaped by community and faith, was exactly what would unsettle the man she was about to meet. Dilly's world ran on numbers long before it ever made room for feelings. He moved through New York and Atlanta investor circles with ease, slipping between private meetings and polished dinners where people spoke carefully and listened for advantage. His days were structured, his schedule guarded, his reputation built on restraint. He didn't chase attention. Attention came to him. In his world, control was currency. Men like Dilly were admired for staying calm when others panicked, for never revealing too much, for keeping emotions separate from decision-making. He learned early that hesitation cost money and vulnerability invited doubt. So he trained himself to remain composed even when stakes were high. Success rewarded him for it. He was known as someone who didn't overpromise, who didn't overreact, who didn't let personal matters bleed into professional ones. That discipline followed him everywhere. In conversations, he spoke with intention. In silence, he observed. In disagreement, he waited. Relationships, to him, followed the same logic. If you provided stability, you were dependable. If you showed up consistently, you were reliable. If you kept things orderly, you were doing your part. Emotion, he believed, would fall into place once the structure was right. Dilly was surrounded by people who looked like him, thought like him, and valued the same markers of success. Dinners where partners were discussed like assets. Conversations where personal life remained surface level and controlled. He rarely questioned it because the system worked. It had worked until Peggy. She didn't respond to polish. She didn't seek reassurance through status. She listened differently, asked differently, moved differently. Dilly noticed it immediately, not in a way that felt threatening, but in a way that unsettled him. She didn't lean forward when he spoke about success. She didn't change her tone to match his. She met him evenly, calmly, without seeking approval. In rooms where people adjusted themselves around him, she stayed rooted. That contrast stayed with him longer than he expected. Dilly told himself it was curiosity, professional interest, respect for someone grounded. But something about her presence lingered, disrupting the neat separation he kept between work and the rest of his life. For the first time in a long while, restraint felt less like control and more like avoidance. And he did not yet realize that the discipline that made him powerful in business would soon be tested in a way numbers could not solve. Their first meeting did not announce itself. There was no dramatic entrance, no introduction that demanded attention. They simply found themselves at the same table, drawn together by circumstance rather than intention. Dilly noticed her voice before he noticed her face. It was steady, thoughtful, unrushed. She spoke as though she expected to be heard, not interrupted. When he finally looked at her, the calm in her expression matched the confidence in her tone. Not practiced, not defensive, just present. Peggy noticed his restraint immediately. He did not dominate the conversation. He waited. When he spoke, it was concise, purposeful. He didn't fill silence for comfort. He let it sit. That alone set him apart from the men she usually encountered, men who confused volume with authority. Their eyes met briefly. Neither looked away first. The moment passed quickly, but something lingered in its place. Not heat. Not curiosity alone. Awareness. When Dilly addressed her directly, his question was simple, thoughtful. It carried no expectation, no performance. Peggy answered without softening her words or sharpening them. She didn't adjust her posture or shift her tone. She spoke as she was. Dilly felt it then. This was not someone impressed by what he represented. This was someone listening to what he was saying. Peggy felt it too. This was not a man seeking validation. This was someone used to being believed. Their exchange was brief, professional, polite, and yet, when it ended, neither of them returned fully to the conversation they had been having before. Dilly found his attention drifting back to her, not because she demanded it, but because she didn't. He caught the way she listened to others, the way she weighed her responses. Nothing about her felt rushed. Peggy felt an unexpected pull. Not toward his status, not toward his confidence, toward the quiet control beneath it. They did not exchange personal details. They did not linger afterward. They did not acknowledge the shift that had taken place. But both of them left that room aware of something they did not yet have words for. This was not attraction that shouted. It was attraction that waited. They did not speak again that day. And yet, neither of them forgot the other. In the days that followed, their paths crossed in ways that felt coincidental but didn't sit that way in the chest. A passing glance across a room. A shared moment of quiet during a break in conversation. Nothing obvious. Nothing that could be pointed to and named. But it was there. Dilly became aware of how often he noticed her before he realized he was looking. Not staring. Not watching. Just aware. He caught himself timing his responses differently when she was nearby, choosing words with more care than usual. It unsettled him that her presence made him conscious of himself. Peggy felt it too. She noticed the way his gaze lingered just a second longer than professional courtesy required. Not bold, not intrusive, curious, controlled, as though he were measuring something he hadn't expected to encounter. When they spoke, the space between them felt charged, even when their words were ordinary. Discussions about work carried an undertone neither acknowledged. Questions held more weight. Silences stretched without discomfort, thick with something neither reached for. Others did not notice. That was what made it dangerous. There were moments when Dilly would glance at her and look away almost immediately, as if reminding himself of a boundary he hadn't yet crossed. Peggy noticed the restraint, the effort it took, and something about that effort stirred her more than confidence ever could. She was used to attention. She was not used to restraint. When she laughed at something someone else said, Dilly found himself listening to the sound more than the words. When he spoke and she met his eyes, the room seemed to narrow around that exchange, even though nothing in their posture betrayed it. They did not touch. They did not flirt. They did not acknowledge what hovered between them. And yet, each encounter added weight. The tension was not built on imagination alone. It was built on awareness, on recognition, on the quiet understanding that if either of them leaned in just a little closer, something would shift beyond control. So they didn't. They let the looks linger. They let the silence speak. They let the tension grow without naming it, because once named, it could not be undone. By the time the week ended, both of them knew something had changed. Not in a way that demanded explanation, in a way that waited. Dilly found himself replaying moments that had meant nothing on their own. A brief exchange in passing, the way Peggy tilted her head when she listened, the pause before she answered a question, as if she weighed honesty carefully before releasing it. He told himself it was interest, respect, professional curiosity, but interest didn't follow him home. Late at night, when the day's numbers had settled and the noise of decisions faded, her presence returned without invitation. Not her voice exactly, not her face alone. The feeling of being seen without being assessed, that unsettled him more than attraction ever had. Peggy noticed the shift too, though she tried to ground herself in reason. She had lived long enough to recognize the early pull of something that could grow complicated if left unchecked. She reminded herself of her values, of the quiet rules she lived by. She did not mistake attention for intention. She did not confuse curiosity for commitment. Still, there were moments when she caught herself wondering. Not about what could happen, about what it would feel like if it did. The suspense lived in what they avoided. They chose separate seats when they could have sat closer. They ended conversations when they might have let them stretch. When silence settled between them, neither rushed to fill it with familiarity. Each choice was deliberate. Each restraint added weight. Dilly felt the tension press against his usual discipline. He was accustomed to acting when something presented itself clearly. This was different. This asked for patience, not control. Awareness, not decision. Peggy felt the pull but trusted her instincts enough to wait. She had seen how quickly desire could outrun wisdom. She refused to let that happen again. So nothing happened. No late-night messages, no private meetings, no lines crossed. But the absence of action did not calm the tension. It sharpened it. Because desire, when left unspoken, does not fade. It watches. It waits. And it grows strongest in the space where two people choose restraint for reasons they do not yet fully understand. By the end of that first chapter of their connection, both of them stood on opposite sides of something unnamed, aware, interested, and quietly bracing for what might come next. The shift happened quietly. What began as brief exchanges turned into conversations that found their way into corners where fewer people listened. Not hidden, just selective. The kind of talks that linger after everyone else has moved on. Dilly noticed how easily conversation with Peggy slipped beyond surface-level topics. She did not ask him what he did. She asked him why he chose it. She did not admire outcomes. She questioned motives. Each question landed gently, but stayed with him longer than he expected. Peggy noticed how Dilly answered. Not defensively, not rehearsed, thoughtfully. He did not rush to impress. He measured his words, as if deciding how much of himself to reveal without losing control. That restraint intrigued her. It also challenged her. They spoke about responsibility before they spoke about desire, about expectations before attraction, about what it meant to build something that lasted. Their conversations were not flirtatious, yet they carried an undercurrent that made them lean in just a little closer when the other spoke. Privacy changed the tone. When it was just the two of them, Dilly allowed pauses to stretch. He listened longer. He asked follow-up questions. He did not interrupt when she spoke about her upbringing, about the women who shaped her sense of self, about choosing peace over approval. Peggy noticed the attention. Not the kind that asked for something in return, but the kind that stayed present. It unsettled her how seen she felt without being claimed. She found herself answering honestly, even when honesty required vulnerability. Their conversations began to feel like a place where defenses softened, a place where curiosity replaced assumption. a place where attraction didn't need to announce itself to be felt. They never named it. They didn't have to, because each private exchange added weight to what already lingered between them, turning interest into awareness, awareness into anticipation, not rushed, not forced, just deepening, slowly, steadily, into something neither of them was ready to define. There were moments when the distance between them felt deliberate, not accidental, chosen. They found themselves standing closer than necessary, close enough to feel the warmth the other carried without reaching for it. When Dilly leaned in to speak, his voice dropped, not to entice, but to keep the moment contained. When Peggy turned toward him, her shoulder brushed his arm, light enough to pretend it meant nothing. Neither acknowledged it. Restraint lived in the pauses. A hand had almost reached for hers, stopping just short. A glance that lingered, then shifted away as if both had silently agreed not to test what would happen next. Each near miss felt heavier than contact would have. Dilly was aware of how easily he could cross the line. That awareness unsettled him. He was used to clarity, to knowing when to act. This tension asked him to wait, to observe himself as much as her. He found that waiting sharpened his attention. Every small movement mattered. Every breath felt louder. Peggy felt the pull, but trusted her instincts enough to hold her ground. She recognized the early signs of something that could move too fast if allowed. Still, it took effort to remain steady when proximity made everything feel charged. They shared moments of quiet where words felt unnecessary. Standing side by side, close enough that the space between them felt intentional, as if they were both measuring how much restraint cost. Others might have mistaken it for professionalism. They knew better, because desire does not always rush forward. Sometimes it waits, pressing against boundaries, testing patience. Sometimes it grows stronger precisely because it is denied. Each near miss deepened what they refused to name, and the restraint they practiced did not weaken the tension. It strengthened it. At some point, the conversations stopped feeling like conversations. They became check-ins, not scheduled, not announced, just moments where one of them would ask, quietly and directly, how the other was holding up. The question was never shallow. It carried weight, as if the answer mattered beyond courtesy. Dilly found himself sharing things he usually kept guarded, doubts about decisions, the pressure of being relied upon, the loneliness that came from being seen as dependable rather than human. He did not dramatize it. He simply told the truth. Peggy listened without interrupting, without trying to fix him. She responded with understanding instead of reassurance, and that difference settled somewhere deep in his chest. Peggy, in turn, spoke about the expectations placed on her as a black woman who had learned to be strong early, about carrying responsibility quietly, about how independence often came at the cost of softness. She did not present it as struggle. She presented it as reality. Dilly heard her, not with sympathy, with recognition. They began to rely on these moments without admitting it. When something unsettled one of them, the other noticed. When days grew heavy, conversation found its way back to that shared space they had created without defining. They did not name what it was. They did not ask where it was going. There was no agreement, no promise, no boundary discussion. And yet, something intimate took shape. Emotional closeness formed not through confession alone, but through consistency, through showing up without expectation, through listening without claiming. Dilly felt himself lowering defenses he had not realized were always raised. He trusted her perspective in ways that surprised him. He noticed how her presence steadied him, not by control, but by clarity. Peggy felt seen without being managed, valued without being claimed. That balance felt rare. It made her careful. It made her curious. They were close, closer than friends, closer than colleagues. Not yet anything they could explain. And that undefined closeness carried its own tension, one that hummed beneath every interaction, reminding them that connection without labels can be just as powerful as love declared out loud. It happened without announcement, no plan, no permission spoken aloud, just a moment that arrived fully formed. They were alone in a quiet space they had shared before, a place that had already learned their silences. Conversation slowed until words felt unnecessary. The distance between them closed, not abruptly, but with a certainty that startled them both. Dilly did not rush. That was what changed everything. He paused, waiting for something unspoken. Not approval, not invitation, understanding. Peggy felt the question in that pause and answered it by staying where she was. Not stepping back, not stepping forward, just staying. The air shifted. Whatever line they had guarded so carefully no longer felt like a boundary. It felt like a door they had been standing in front of for too long. When closeness finally arrived, it was quiet, intentional, not claimed, not taken. Something shared without urgency, without performance, without words that might break the spell. Peggy felt the weight of him near her, the restraint still present even as it loosened. She noticed the care in his movements, the way attention replaced assumption. It was not overwhelming. It was consuming in a subtler way, drawing her inward instead of sweeping her away. Dilly felt the difference immediately. This was not desire driven by certainty. This required awareness. This required listening without speaking. The moment stretched, suspended in a calm that felt fragile and powerful at the same time. They crossed into intimacy without naming it, without anchoring it to meaning or future promises. And when it ended, it did not collapse into confusion. It lingered, quietly, heavily, unresolved. They did not say what it was. They did not decide what it meant. They simply stepped back into themselves, aware that something had shifted in a way that could not be undone. Afterward, neither of them reached out, not because there was nothing to say, because there was too much. The space they had crossed could not be undone by casual words. Text messages felt too light. Conversations felt too exposed. Silence became the safest place to stand, even as it thickened with questions neither wanted to ask yet. Dilly returned to his routine, but something in it no longer fit as neatly as before. Meetings blurred. Decisions took longer. The discipline he relied on now felt strained, stretched by the memory of closeness he had not planned for and could not categorize. He replayed the moment without trying to reshape it. The restraint, the awareness, the way intimacy had demanded presence instead of control. It unsettled him that something so quiet could leave such weight behind. Peggy felt it too. She moved through her days with the same calm others expected, but her thoughts kept circling back to what had been shared without promise. She did not regret it. She also refused to romanticize it. That balance made the silence heavier, because silence invites imagination. It asked questions without mercy. What had changed? What had been revealed? What would be expected next? Neither of them wanted to be the first to speak and risk defining something before understanding it. And so the tension grew, not through closeness, but through distance. Every encounter afterward carried an undercurrent. A glance held too long, a pause that lingered, words chosen carefully, as if both were guarding something fragile. The silence did not cool what existed between them. It sharpened it, and by the time they finally spoke again, the tension had multiplied into something that could no longer be ignored. If this story is already pulling you in, tap the like button and drop a comment. Your support keeps Mr. Osteen's story and love tales growing. Peggy noticed the change before she allowed herself to name it. It wasn't dramatic. No sudden fear, no rush of panic. Just a quiet awareness that something in her body felt different. Mornings lingered longer. Fatigue settled into her bones in a way rest did not fix. Small things, scents, silence, even certain foods, felt heavier than they should. She told herself it was stress. The silence between her and Dilly had been carrying weight, and weight has a way of showing up where you least expect it. Still, something inside her insisted this was more than exhaustion. When certainty arrived, it did not come with tears. It came with stillness. Peggy stood alone in the bathroom, holding truth in her hands, feeling the room close in without actually moving. The world outside continued as usual, cars passing, neighbors talking, life unfolding without pause. But inside her, everything rearranged itself. A child. The word felt unreal at first. Not frightening, not comforting. Real. She sat down slowly, letting the reality settle without forcing herself to react. She thought of the weeks leading up to that moment, the restraint, the closeness, the silence afterward. She thought of how desire had crossed into something deeper without permission or planning. This was not something she could hold quietly. Dilly had a right to know. Not because of obligation alone, but because this changed the balance between them. Whatever they had been navigating before now carried consequence. What had once lived in tension now demanded clarity. Peggy did not call him immediately. She needed time to steady herself, to meet the truth on her own terms before inviting anyone else into it. She placed a hand on her stomach, not with sentiment, but with resolve. This was not a mistake. This was not a punishment. This was responsibility. When she finally reached for her phone, her hand did not shake. The uncertainty she felt was not about the child. It was about what this would reveal about the man she had grown close to. Because desire could remain undefined. Silence could linger. But a child changed everything. And with that realization, the power between them shifted, quietly, irrevocably, before a single word was spoken. Dilly did not hesitate. When Peggy told him, his response was immediate, measured, and decisive. He asked practical questions first: appointments, care, support, what she needed now, what she would need later. His voice remained steady, anchored in certainty. He promised stability without being asked. Within days, arrangements were made. Medical expenses were covered. A safer living situation was discussed. Plans unfolded quickly, efficiently, as though he were managing a complex investment with long-term returns. Dilly believed this was love in action. Providing had always been his language. When a problem appeared, he solved it. When responsibility arrived, he met it head-on. He did not disappear. He did not deny the child. He did not question his role. In his mind, that mattered. Peggy watched him move with purpose, impressed but unsettled. She appreciated the security. She respected the follow-through. Yet something remained untouched between them. Dilly spoke of logistics. He spoke of preparation. He spoke of what needed to be done. He did not speak of fear. He did not ask how she felt. He did not sit with uncertainty. When she tried to share the emotional weight of the moment, his responses returned to solutions. He reassured her with plans instead of presence, with structure instead of softness. Peggy recognized the pattern immediately. This was how he loved, by making sure nothing fell apart, by ensuring there were no gaps, by holding control tightly enough that chaos never entered. But pregnancy was not a problem to be solved. It was a shift that required listening, not management. And as Dilly continued to step up in ways that looked admirable from the outside, the distance between them grew in ways that could not be measured. He was present. He was responsible. He was reliable. And yet Peggy felt alone. Because money can provide comfort, but it cannot answer questions the heart is still asking. And in the quiet moments when she needed reassurance instead of plans, she realized that Dilly's greatest strength might also be his greatest limitation. To the outside world, Dilly looked admirable. He was present at appointments. He handled logistics quietly and efficiently. People spoke well of him in passing conversations, noting how responsibly he was handling everything. In professional circles, his situation was framed as proof of character, a man stepping up, a man doing the right thing. Peggy heard those comments and nodded politely. She understood how it looked. What people did not see was the distance that followed them into private spaces. Conversations stayed structured. Check-ins sounded like briefings. Support arrived on time, but comfort did not linger. Dilly showed concern through preparation. Peggy needed reassurance through connection. In public, they stood close enough to appear united. In private, the space between them felt carefully managed. When she spoke about fear, he answered with certainty. When she mentioned uncertainty, he returned to schedules and plans. There was no cruelty in it. There was also no softness. Peggy began to feel as though her pregnancy had turned into a project, one Dilly was determined to manage well. The more efficient he became, the more unseen she felt. He noticed her quiet but misread it. Dilly believed she needed stability more than conversation. He assumed reassurance lived in action, not words. And because no crisis unfolded, he believed everything was under control. But distance does not announce itself loudly. It grows in silence. And in that silence, two different realities formed, one that looked strong from the outside and one that felt fragile on the inside. Peggy had seen this before, not in Dilly exactly, but in the women she grew up watching. Strong men who provided and stayed, yet never learned how to be emotionally present. Women who adjusted themselves around structure, convincing themselves that responsibility was the same as care. She had promised herself she would not repeat that pattern. Pregnancy sharpened her awareness. Every choice felt heavier now, not just for her, but for the life growing inside her. She questioned what her child would learn from watching them interact, what love would look like through the lens of quiet distance. She did not want her child to grow up believing affection was optional as long as bills were paid. She did not want closeness to feel transactional. She did not want to normalize emotional absence. At night, when everything settled, those thoughts pressed hardest. Dilly never asked what scared her most. She never told him unprompted, not because she didn't trust him, but because she sensed he didn't know how to receive vulnerability without turning it into a task. That realization hurt more than anger would have. Peggy began to understand that staying required more than endurance. It required honesty, with herself first. And that honesty whispered a difficult truth. Love that does not grow emotionally can still leave wounds, even when it shows up responsibly. The attraction between them did not disappear. If anything, it grew more complicated. Moments of closeness still surfaced unexpectedly. A shared glance, a pause that lingered too long. The familiarity of their bodies in the same space. Desire still lived there, quietly reminding them of what first pulled them together. But now, attraction carried weight. It was no longer just about chemistry. It was tied to decisions, to permanence, to the kind of future that could not be undone easily. Dilly felt the shift too, though he did not yet understand it. What once felt natural now felt pressured. Desire had consequences. Silence had meaning. Every interaction seemed to carry an unspoken question neither of them voiced. What are we becoming? Peggy sensed that question every time they stood near each other without touching. Every time attraction rose without resolution. Every time responsibility pressed against intimacy without balance. Something had changed irrevocably. What began as unspoken desire had turned into a test of maturity, of emotional growth, of what love required when consequences arrived. And neither of them could pretend otherwise anymore. Motherhood did not arrive gently. It came in waves of sleepless nights, constant vigilance, and a tiredness that settled into Peggy's bones. The days blurred together. Feeding schedules replaced freedom. Silence became rare. Even rest felt incomplete. Dilly noticed the changes, but he observed them the way he observed data. He arranged help. He adjusted schedules. He ensured nothing was missing. When she looked tired, he reminded her she could rest later. When she seemed distant, he assumed it was temporary. Peggy felt the exhaustion differently. Her body was tired, yes, but her spirit was more so. The constant responsibility stripped away any illusion she had once held about balance. Everything now required intention, even intimacy. She no longer had energy for pretending. She no longer had patience for assumptions. At night, when the baby finally slept, the quiet did not bring relief. It brought awareness. The space between her and Dilly felt heavier than before, even when they were close. Exhaustion has a way of revealing truth. And the truth was beginning to surface. Desire did not disappear after the baby. It changed. What once felt magnetic now felt uneven. When Dilly reached for closeness, it felt familiar but not fulfilling. The physical pull was still there, but something deeper failed to meet it. Peggy noticed the pattern quickly. Dilly approached intimacy with confidence, not curiosity. He assumed familiarity meant understanding. He relied on certainty where connection was required. She responded, but without fullness. It felt like two people sharing space instead of meeting within it. Moments that should have brought closeness instead left her feeling unseen. Not because he lacked effort, but because he did not adjust. Dilly sensed the shift but misread it. He believed comfort had replaced excitement. He assumed this was what long-term closeness looked like. He did not realize that intimacy without listening becomes routine instead of connection. Peggy did not want routine. She wanted presence. She chose her words carefully. One evening, after the baby had finally settled, Peggy spoke without accusation. She did not raise her voice. She did not assign blame. She explained how she felt, how closeness no longer felt mutual, how she missed being understood, how intimacy felt assumed instead of shared. Dilly listened, but he listened the way he always did, waiting for his turn to respond. He heard problem instead of emotion. He heard dissatisfaction instead of vulnerability. He heard failure instead of invitation. Peggy tried again, explaining that attraction alone was not enough. That effort required adaptation. That closeness asked for attention, not certainty. She was not asking him to change who he was. She was asking him to meet her where she was. Dilly nodded, but something in his posture tightened. The calm he carried began to feel defensive. He was not used to being told that what he offered was incomplete. The gap between them widened, not from anger, but from misunderstanding. Dilly felt blindsided. In his mind, he had done everything right. He had stayed. He had provided. He had adjusted his life to accommodate responsibility. To hear that something was still lacking felt unfair. He responded with logic. He reminded her of everything he had done. He pointed out the consistency, the reliability, the structure. He asked what more she wanted, his tone calm but edged with frustration. Peggy heard the shift immediately. This was not conversation anymore. This was defense. Her honesty had become criticism in his ears. Her vulnerability had turned into an evaluation he felt compelled to refute. Dilly did not raise his voice. He did not dismiss her outright, but he closed himself off. He spoke less, asked fewer questions, retreated into control. The same discipline that served him in business now shielded him from discomfort. Peggy recognized the pattern. This was the moment many women she knew had learned to quiet themselves. She refused to. The proposal came shortly after. Dilly presented it as resolution. Marriage would provide stability. It would formalize what already existed. It would remove uncertainty. His words were confident, assured, final. Peggy listened. She did not respond immediately. The hesitation surprised him. She asked questions instead, about emotional presence, about growth, about whether marriage would bring change, or simply place structure over the same distance. Dilly answered with certainty again. That certainty was what stopped her. She told him she needed time, not because she did not care, not because she did not feel attraction, but because she understood something now that exhaustion had revealed. Marriage would not fix what they refused to face. The truth had emerged, quietly but unmistakably. Love required more than consistency. Intimacy demanded humility, and attraction, no matter how strong, could not replace emotional effort. Peggy did not refuse him in anger. That was what unsettled Dilly the most. She sat across from him, her posture steady, her voice even. There was no shaking, no dramatic pause meant to wound. She did not rehearse her words or search for the right tone. She simply spoke. "I won't marry you." The sentence landed softly, but its weight pressed down hard. Dilly blinked once, certain he had misunderstood. Marriage had felt like the logical next step, the responsible step, the step that resolved uncertainty and placed everything back into order. He waited for her to add something else. She didn't. Peggy met his eyes without defiance, without apology. Her calm was not indifference. It was clarity. She had carried this decision quietly for longer than he realized. "I need you to hear me," she continued. "Not to fix this, not to solve it. Just hear me." Dilly nodded, still composed, still confident that explanation would shift the moment. He believed misunderstanding lived here, not refusal. But this was not confusion. This was a choice. Peggy spoke carefully, not because she feared his reaction, but because she respected the truth enough to present it honestly. "This isn't about attraction," she said. "We have that. We've always had that." Dilly leaned forward slightly, relieved to hear something familiar. Desire had always felt like solid ground between them. "But attraction isn't effort," she continued. "Wanting me doesn't mean you're listening to me." The room grew still. She explained what she had been trying to say for months. That closeness required adjustment. That intimacy asked for curiosity, not certainty. That love was built in the willingness to learn, not in the confidence of already knowing. "You show up," she said. "You provide. You handle responsibility. But when I talk about how I feel, you respond like I've handed you a problem to solve." Dilly frowned, not angry yet, just confused. "That's how I help," he replied. "That's how I show I care." "I know," Peggy said, "and that's the problem." She did not accuse him of neglect. She did not list failures. She simply explained that effort meant meeting someone where they were, not where logic said they should be. "Marriage won't make you listen differently," she said quietly. "It'll just make it harder for me to say when something hurts." Dilly had always trusted his certainty. It had carried him through negotiations, setbacks, moments when hesitation could have cost him everything. Confidence was his anchor, his shield, his proof. Now it wavered. He searched her face for hesitation, for softness that suggested persuasion might still work. He expected compromise, negotiation, a middle ground. Instead, he found resolve. "You're saying I'm not enough," he said, trying to keep his voice level. "That's not what I said," Peggy replied. "I'm saying effort matters more than assumption." The distinction mattered to her. It felt like rejection to him. Dilly felt something unfamiliar rise in his chest. Not anger, not fear, but doubt. For the first time, certainty did not bring relief. It brought exposure. He realized that everything he relied on, structure, provision, consistency, had limits here, and those limits had been reached. Dilly tried to regain footing. He spoke about stability, about how marriage would benefit the child, about long-term security, about how commitment was demonstrated through action, not conversation. The words sounded reasonable. They did not move her. Power had always worked for him before. Influence, logic, control of outcomes. But none of it shifted Peggy's position. She did not argue. She did not defend. She simply listened and remained unmoved. That was when Dilly understood something deeply unsettling. He could not convince her, not with reason, not with provision, not with certainty. For the first time, his presence did not command the moment. The dynamic he was accustomed to, where resolution followed insistence, failed him, and in that failure, something fragile surfaced, vulnerability. The conversation ended without resolution, not because it escalated, because it didn't. They sat in silence, the space between them no longer charged with attraction, but heavy with consequence. The desire that once hummed quietly now retreated, replaced by something colder and clearer. Peggy did not reach for him. Dilly did not either. The absence spoke louder than any argument could have. Attraction had brought them together. Responsibility had bound them. But silence now stood where intimacy once lived. They both felt it. This was not a pause. It was a turning point. What came next would depend not on desire, but on growth, not on confidence, but on humility. And neither of them knew yet whether Dilly was capable of meeting that moment. Do you think she made the right choice? Share your thoughts below. This is what Mr. Osteen's story and Love Tales is all about. Night returned the way it always did. Quiet, unannounced, unavoidable. The city outside settled into a low hum, distant and indifferent. Inside the apartment, everything felt closer. The walls seemed to hold memory. The air carried things left unsaid. Peggy stood near the window for a long moment, watching lights flicker in other buildings, other lives, other choices. She had learned that night had a way of stripping away distraction. What survived the dark was usually the truth. Dilly moved through the room with familiarity that once felt comforting. Now it felt careful. He spoke less, walked slower, as though he sensed the weight of what lingered between them and did not yet know how to carry it. Neither of them mentioned the conversation from earlier days, the refusal, the silence, the distance that had settled in its place. Night did not allow avoidance. It waited. The baby slept peacefully. That fact mattered more than either of them said aloud. Soft breathing rose and fell from the next room, steady and innocent, unaware of the tension pressing against the adults meant to protect her. The quiet that followed was not empty. It was full of consequence. Peggy listened for any sound that might pull her away from the moment. None came. Dilly noticed the same thing. The child's sleep removed excuses. There was no distraction left to hide behind. What remained was whatever they had been circling without naming. Parenthood had changed the rules. There was no room now for half-truths or assumptions. Every word spoken would echo beyond the room, shaping something far bigger than either of them. That awareness sharpened everything. They stood too close, not touching, not retreating. The space between them felt deliberate, as if both understood that a single step would tip the balance in a way neither could undo. Dilly broke the silence first, not with anger, not with accusation, with frustration that had been carefully contained for too long. "You're quiet," he said. Peggy did not answer immediately. Her quiet was not avoidance. It was restraint. She had learned that speaking too quickly often softened truths that needed to stand firm. Dilly felt the absence of response like resistance. He had offered certainty. He had offered commitment. He had offered what he knew how to give. What unsettled him was that it had not been enough. The tension pressed tighter, fueled by closeness, history, and desire that had nowhere to go. It lived in their breathing, in the way his gaze lingered, in the way she did not look away. This was not desire trying to be satisfied. This was pride trying to protect itself. Dilly's voice dropped, not raised, not harsh, controlled. "Swear you don't like what I do to you." The words hung between them, heavy and exposed. They were not a question. They were a demand for reassurance, a challenge wrapped in confidence, a final attempt to anchor the conversation in the one place he believed still belonged to him. Desire. Dilly believed attraction settled doubt, that wanting someone erased disagreement, that intimacy excused the things he had not learned how to change. Peggy felt the words land fully, not on her body, on her understanding. In that moment, she saw the truth clearly. This was not about closeness. This was not about pleasure. This was about control disguised as certainty. Peggy did not answer immediately. The pause stretched, not because she was unsure, but because she finally understood what was being asked of her. He wanted her to soften the truth, to reassure him without requiring growth, to validate desire in place of effort. The silence was not rejection. It was clarity. Dilly felt it instantly. The stillness unsettled him more than anger would have. For the first time, his confidence did not command the moment. His words did not move her. His presence did not decide the outcome. Control slipped. Peggy met his eyes calmly, and in that calm, everything changed. Attraction no longer held power here. Certainty no longer carried weight. What stood between them now was truth, uncomfortable, unavoidable, and finally visible. That single line, spoken in confidence, had exposed everything he had been avoiding. And neither of them could go back. Dilly did not raise his voice. That was the first thing that surprised even him. The words he had spoken still hung in the air, unanswered, heavy with implication. In the past, moments like this would have triggered a response, defense sharpened into certainty, logic stepping in to reclaim control. This time, something held him back. He watched Peggy stand there, calm but unmoved, and felt the absence of reaction echo louder than any argument. Her silence did not provoke him. It stopped him. Dilly exhaled slowly. For the first time, he noticed how familiar his pattern had become, how often he reached for confidence when uncertainty surfaced, how quickly he framed emotional discomfort as a problem to solve rather than a truth to sit with. He did not like the realization. He thought of the line he had spoken and heard it again, stripped of bravado, bare of justification. It sounded different now, smaller, less certain, not persuasive. In that stillness, Dilly felt something shift, not outwardly, but inwardly. A recognition he had avoided for years began to surface. The understanding that control had protected him, but it had also kept him distant. He had mistaken composure for maturity, certainty for connection, desire for understanding. Dilly did not step closer. He did not retreat. He stayed where he was and let the discomfort settle. For the first time, he did not try to win the moment. He tried to understand it. Dilly had always believed insecurity belonged to other people, to those who hesitated, to those who needed reassurance, to those who lacked direction. He had built his life on certainty, on being the one others leaned on. Confidence had not just been a trait, it had been armor. And armor, once worn long enough, becomes invisible to the person wearing it. Standing there now, with Peggy unmoved and the air heavy with truth, that armor cracked. Not loudly, quietly. Dilly realized that the question he had asked her was not about desire at all. It had been about fear. Fear that what he offered was not enough. Fear that if attraction failed to anchor them, there would be nothing left to stand on. He had wanted reassurance, not honesty. That recognition unsettled him. He thought about how rarely he questioned himself when outcomes worked in his favor. How often he relied on consistency to silence doubt. How little space he left for vulnerability, because vulnerability did not guarantee results. Yet here he was, faced with something he could not manage into submission. Dilly felt exposed in a way success had never prepared him for. He could not point to a plan. He could not reference achievement. There was no structure to hide behind, only self-examination. He acknowledged something he had never admitted out loud, that listening deeply scared him. Because listening required change, and change meant stepping into uncertainty without control. For the first time, Dilly did not try to correct the feeling. He let it exist. He met Peggy's gaze, not to challenge her but to see if she would notice the shift. She did not soften. She did not move. That steadiness forced him to face the truth he had avoided. The insecurity was not hers. It was his. Change did not arrive with promises. Dilly did not reach for words meant to soften the moment or repair it quickly. He understood, perhaps for the first time, that explanation had been his escape. This time, he chose restraint differently. "I don't know how to do this the way you need," he said quietly. The admission surprised him as much as it surprised her. He did not attach a defense to it. He did not follow it with justification. He let the truth stand alone, unpolished. Peggy listened without interruption. Dilly continued, slowly, choosing honesty over control. He acknowledged that he had relied on confidence where curiosity was required, that he had assumed familiarity meant understanding, that he had mistaken providing for presence. "I've been listening to respond," he said, "not to learn." The words settled between them, heavy but sincere. He did not ask for forgiveness. He did not ask for reassurance. He did not ask for another chance. Instead, he spoke about intention, about paying attention without expecting agreement, about asking questions without preparing answers, about allowing discomfort to exist without rushing to erase it. This was not performance. There was no urgency in his tone, no attempt to reclaim footing. He spoke as someone standing on unfamiliar ground, aware that progress here would be slow and uncertain. Peggy noticed the difference, not because he said the right things, but because he stopped trying to steer the outcome. Dilly ended the conversation without conclusion. "I'll show you," he said simply, and for the first time, those words did not sound like confidence. They sounded like effort. Dilly did something Peggy did not expect. He stepped back, not emotionally, not defensively, but deliberately. He did not ask her what she needed to decide. He did not set timelines or frame progress as a goal to reach. He did not return to the subject with persuasive language or quiet reminders of what could be gained. He gave her space without absence. Days passed without pressure. Conversations stayed grounded. When Peggy spoke, Dilly listened without redirecting her words toward resolution. He asked questions only when clarity was needed, not when reassurance tempted him. Peggy noticed the shift in the small things, the absence of expectation in his tone, the way he let silence settle without filling it, the fact that he no longer reached for certainty to steady himself. He did not ask if she had changed her mind. That mattered, because for the first time since the pregnancy, Peggy did not feel like a decision waiting to be made. She felt like a person being respected in her pause. Dilly's restraint was not dramatic. It did not announce itself. It showed up in consistency without demand, in patience without entitlement. Peggy felt the difference in her body before she trusted it in her heart. Pressure had always made her guarded. Freedom made her observant. She watched him carefully, aware that real change does not rush to prove itself. It settles into behavior. It waits to be tested. Dilly did not claim progress. He allowed time to do what confidence never could. And in that space, something fragile but honest began to take shape. Not certainty, not reunion, but the possibility of trust built without force. Change began to show itself in ways that could not be measured quickly. Dilly listened more than he spoke. He adjusted without announcing that he was adjusting. He showed awareness where he once relied on certainty. And yet, none of it came with expectation. That unsettled Peggy. Not because she doubted his effort, but because effort alone did not promise outcome. Growth did not automatically restore trust. Understanding the difference required honesty she could not ignore. She watched him carefully, not searching for flaws, but observing patterns. Real change did not rush to be acknowledged. It settled quietly, waiting to be challenged. There were moments when attraction resurfaced unexpectedly. A shared look. A pause that carried memory. Desire still existed, but it no longer held authority over her decisions. That was new. Peggy understood now that wanting someone did not require choosing them. Attraction could remain present without dictating direction. That awareness gave her clarity, but it also created distance. Dilly sensed it too. He did not mistake restraint for rejection. He understood finally that growth did not entitle him to reconciliation. Effort did not earn immediate reward. And learning to sit with that truth became part of his change. There was no declaration, no turning point wrapped in certainty, only a quiet understanding between them. Whatever happened next would not be decided by desire alone. It would depend on time, consistency, and whether growth could sustain itself without promise. The question was no longer whether Dilly could change. It was whether change, even genuine change, would be enough. Time did not erase the complexity between them, but it reshaped how they carried it. Currenting settled into rhythm without announcement. Conversations became steady, focused, respectful. Decisions were discussed instead of assumed. Schedules were shared without tension. The child became the center, not the leverage. Dilly showed up consistently, not to impress, not to negotiate, to participate. Peggy noticed the shift immediately. There was no sense of obligation hanging over his presence. No unspoken expectation that cooperation should lead to closeness. He engaged without inserting himself where he was not invited. Their communication became practical and calm. They disagreed without escalation. They adjusted without resentment. The child moved between them without carrying emotional weight that did not belong to her. This was not reconciliation. It was responsibility done with care. And for the first time since everything had changed, Peggy felt steady in her role, not accommodating, not enduring, but choosing how she participated. Something else shifted alongside that stability. The emotional dynamic between them no longer leaned on attraction as a foundation. It rested on awareness. Respect replaced tension. Understanding replaced assumption. Dilly listened without preparing responses. He asked questions without steering outcomes. When Peggy spoke, he allowed her words to remain hers. That mattered. The absence of pressure created space for honesty, not closeness for its own sake, but clarity. They spoke openly about boundaries, about what had hurt, about what would not be repeated. There was no bitterness in those conversations, only truth. Peggy felt no need to guard herself. Dilly felt no need to assert himself. The balance between them felt earned, not imposed. This was not the dynamic they had imagined early on. It was better. Peggy no longer waited for reassurance. She no longer shaped her decisions around someone else's readiness or uncertainty. She spoke clearly. She chose intentionally. She honored her instincts without apology. Her life expanded beyond reaction. She leaned into her community again. The women who had shaped her wisdom welcomed her without question. Their conversations reminded her that strength was not loud and peace was not passive. Peggy understood now that agency was not about control, it was about alignment, about choosing relationships that did not require shrinking or explaining basic needs. She did not owe Dilly a future. She did not owe him forgiveness wrapped in romance. What she owed herself was honesty. And in reclaiming that, she felt lighter than she had in years. Dilly learned something he had never been taught. Intimacy was not about confidence. It was not about certainty. It was not about desire proven through consistency alone. Intimacy required listening without control, presence without agenda, effort without expectation. He applied that understanding everywhere, not just with Peggy. He noticed how often he had equated calm with connection and restraint with maturity. He began allowing discomfort to exist without immediately correcting it. That change did not make him weaker. It made him honest. Dilly understood now that intimacy did not guarantee closeness, and growth did not guarantee reconciliation. What it offered was integrity, within himself and in how he related to others. He no longer chased outcomes. He practiced awareness. Love does not survive on desire alone. Attraction can bring people together, but it cannot teach them how to stay connected when pride stands in the way. Power can provide structure, but it cannot replace listening. Responsibility can hold a family together, but it cannot heal what humility refuses to face. True growth begins when certainty steps aside. Peggy chose herself without bitterness. Dilly chose change without entitlement. Their story did not end with a dramatic reunion. It ended with truth, and sometimes that is the most powerful ending of all. If this story taught you something about love, pride, and growth, please like, share, comment, and subscribe to Mr. Osteen's Story and Love Tales. Stories like this change lives.